Welcome to Post Games, a podcast about why and how we love video games. I am your host, Christopher Thomas Plant. The Nintendo Switch 2, when you listen to this episode, is out. Maybe you are playing it while you are listening to this, unless you're driving, in which case, don't play the Nintendo Switch while you're listening to this. Anyway, I am doing something a little bit different this week. I'm really curious about how a video game launch actually works. For us, the people who enjoy these things, for the stores who have to fight to get stock and then to sell it, sometimes practically at a loss, and for a company like Nintendo that is putting new hardware out into the market. For a great video game launch, everything needs to work just right. There's something strange about the Switch 2 launch, wouldn't you say? There are a lot of factors for that. The Switch 2 costs more than we expect from a Nintendo console. The Switch 2 is iterative rather than a big, bold swing like the original Switch. What we expect of a new video game console has changed. Each couple years, a console getting an incremental upgrade. Things are different than they used to be. I'm not sure it's necessarily bad. I'm certainly not sure if it's good, but it is different. So this week, rather than the format that you've heard over the past couple of episodes, you're going to hear a new format. And that was always how this show would work. We would have kind of formats that we'd slot in and out. And this one is really interview heavy. We're going to have multiple acts, multiple interviews, multiple perspectives. I'm going to talk with a pair of video game historians, people who know the ins and outs of this industry. One will really focus on the retail perspective, and the other will go really deep into the Nintendo of it all. This is a chill out episode. This is an episode that you'll want to plop on while you're enjoying those new games, because I'm sure if you do have access to a Switch 2, that is probably your priority right now. So, this week on Post Games, have video game launches changed, or have we? Act 1, what it's like to run a video game shop when a console launches. I have an interview with Kelsey Lewin, a video game historian and the co-owner of Pink Gorilla Games. Act 2, Nintendo's history of console launches. An interview with Chris Kohler, author of one of the very first books on Nintendo, and currently editorial director of digital Eclipse. Act 3, the news of the week, of which there is plenty. On top of this being Nintendo Switch 2 launch week, it is also Summer Game Fest, the closest we have to a replacement to E3, the focal point of video game marketing each year. And for Patreon subscribers, something very special and a little different and a bit of an experiment, a bonus act, what it was like to be the parents scrambling for new consoles and video games in the 1990s. An interview with my parents. That's right, Ken and Kathy. I can't wait for you to hear from them. You will get all of that, and you will get a lot of excitement. Because here's the thing. I know the second the Switch 2 is in my hands, I am going to be thrilled. And all of that enthusiasm is going to rush into me. I just want to figure out how all of that works. How do we go from 1 minute not playing the new cool thing to the next minute it just being another part of our lives? We'll figure that out and so much more right after the break. My first guest is Kelsey Lewin. Kelsey is the co-owner of Pink Gorilla Games and the very first person who came to my mind when I needed an expert on running a video game shop during a big console launch. She is a video game historian who previously served as co-director at the Video Game History Foundation, helping build it into the institution it is today. She is an author who literally wrote the book on Animal Crossing for publisher Boss Fight Books, and she's a co-host of the excellent and relatively new podcast Pew Pew Bang. It's part of the MinMax network. It is one of the most enjoyable gaming conversation podcasts operating today. It kicks ass, and you should check it out. Now, we do ultimately talk about how a shop handles a launch. That's why I got Kelsey on the phone to begin with. But speaking with a historian, speaking with somebody I really admire, I had to ask a wide variety of questions about video game console launches. So I hope you enjoy that stuff too. Without further delay, Kelsey Lewin. What was the golden era of the video game console launch? And what was it like?
I think it's probably, and this is going to be I think this is a subjective answer, but I think kind of the PS2, Xbox, GameCube general era, the early 2000s I think that's probably some of the most interesting because you have Sega kind of bowing out of the market at that point. They're scattering their IP among the three remaining people. You know, Crazy Taxi went to Microsoft and, you know, Super Monkey Ball went to Nintendo or whatever. Like, they're bowing out of the console market and we've got a new player coming in and it seems like there's a lot of big competition and, but maybe, I mean, that's my perspective and I'm a little younger and I think that was the time where I felt it was like the strongest kind of competition.
What was it like for you at that time with a console launch? Like, what do you remember of the event itself?
I think the first console I got close to release date was the Wii. And that was just my parents were, probably they just overpaid someone on eBay for a Wii. Yeah. I don't think they stood in any lines, but that's when I feel like it started to become a real phenomenon. But there were console launches that sold out before that too. Usually when consoles launch, they don't have enough stock to get every single, it takes a while to manufacture and ship and store, especially consoles. I mean, you can't, if you have demand for 900 Dreamcasts, like, just try to imagine what a room of 900 Dreamcasts would look like, how much space that takes up. So
I do like the idea of picturing a room of 900 Dreamcasts. That is honestly
it's a cool room.
Fantasy. It's a great room. Yeah, I do remember the 99.99 launch of the Dreamcast.
Yeah.
And, appearing on MTV and all these promos and it being an event. And then a year later, realizing a launch does not make a console successful. And that did feel brutal.
A strong launch, even. Like, I mean, it had a strong, popular, well-attended launch.
Turns out when you can pirate all of the games with a CD rewriter, pretty bad news.
Well, because famously, they don't, console manufacturers don't make the money on the consoles themselves. They make the money on everything else you buy with it. I mean, they're often loss leaders, so.
Yeah. Why do you think it is that the midnight launch doesn't feel like such a big thing anymore?
We no longer have to have a physical thing, other than the console itself, obviously, but we no longer have to have a physical thing in order to play the game. A ton of companies are doing this, like, pre-install the game and then it unlocks at midnight kind of thing, and I get it. I get why. I love the midnight console launch or the midnight game launch, but I also get why, especially if you live 20 minutes from your nearest GameStop or whatever, like, you're going to drive all the way there, you're going to wait outside, it'll take longer for you to get your game, bring it home, install it. If you actually want to play it the second it goes live, the faster thing to do is pre-install it, pre-purchase it, and it's just ready when it actually hits midnight. But yeah, I mean, the community aspect of the midnight launch is super fun. We still do it at our game store, except we do 9 p.m. launches because that's midnight on the East Coast. So, and then I don't have to stay up as late.
I love that. Well, let's dig into that, what it's like to run a game shop during a console launch. You've been operating Pink Gorilla since 2012, is that right?
No, I've been with the company since 2012. I've owned it since 2016, so 9 years now.
That's incredible.
Yeah, so I I started out just as a regular employee with the company, as did the other co-owner. We were both just hired employees, later managers, and purchased the company from the previous owner in 2016. It's gone through some changes since then. We've certainly grown it since then, but not the founder, just the owner.
So you started when you were working as an employee the same time the Wii U launched. And a year before the PS4 and Xbox One. What was your first console launch with the store like? How did it go?
It was a lot of phone calls about stuff we couldn't fulfill, which is going to be a recurring theme in this conversation. Our store, Pink Gorilla, is fairly well known for a local game shop, but I think people will be surprised to know that it's really difficult to get any allocation of some of this stuff. So when the Wii U came out, and I was working there, and we were getting lots of calls about it and everything, one of my coworkers at the time actually just had to go to a GameStop and pick up Wii U's for all of us at the store that wanted to buy one. We couldn't get even 4 Wii U's for the store. The Wii U, even at the time, was not a particularly exciting launch. People were like,
it was rough.
This kind of looks dumb. And even then, we weren't really able to get anything. We were able to get some controllers and stuff like that. So, and some of the games as well. But yeah, I mean, in general, the big companies tend to prioritize the big box stores and making sure that the places you think of when you buy a console, your Walmarts, your GameStops, your Targets, all of those are going to have a decent stock rather than hundreds of small game shops getting 2 or 3 at a time.
You mentioned getting the phone calls from people checking to see about availability. When does that begin for a new console?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's the second it's announced, and then it ramps up again when there is any hint of pre-orders going on at other companies. So with the Switch 2, and this was true of the Wii U and stuff as well, when they announced pre-orders like, hey, here's the pre-order date for Target and Best Buy or whatever, we start getting phone calls, and they're very sweet. They're like, hey, I'd rather buy it from you guys. I'd rather support you guys. The fun thing is, even when we can get consoles, they're a loss leader for us, too. Unless you're paying cash, we are losing money on the credit card fees on consoles. But that's fine. I mean, most people do buy more than just the console itself. So, yeah, we had a big ramp up, when those dates were announced. And then also, the Switch 2 in particular was very difficult to get. That was kind of a mess of a pre-order system. And so the next day after the big Walmart, Best Buy, Target pre-order debacle, we were getting a lot of calls and a lot of people being like, hey, I didn't get one last night. Can I reserve one with you guys? And we have to kind of shrug our shoulders and be like, we still don't know if we're getting any. I can't take your pre-order money.
How do you account for that at launch? So, again, the episode is out. The console is out. Presumably, it is sold out everywhere. And I imagine this is when people really start frantically calling. You still have to run a business. Does somebody just have phone duty? How does that work?
We post as much as possible, both on the front of the door and on social media to at least mitigate that a little bit, to just be like, I'm sorry, we don't have, this in stock. We've been doing this for Pokemon cards a lot already because Pokemon has been a very popular and sold out item lately. And that helps a little bit. If you message us on social media, it'll do an automatic response that's just like, if this is about the Switch 2 or Pokemon or whatever, insert sold out product here. We're sorry, we don't have any in stock at this time. Here's the information we have. What I've been telling people, and because this is literally the case, our distributors are still saying hey, it's possible that we'll have a couple for you, but we still don't know. We still don't have a way to allocate this. We can't make any promises. In this case, that's true for the console, that's true for the accessories, and that's true for the first-party games. The only thing I can say with 100% certainty at this point, when we're recording May 21st, maybe this has changed since then, check the Pink Gorilla social media if you want to know. At this point, all we know is third-party Switch 2 stuff we can get. That's it.
I'm curious for an indie shop how you think about scalpers. Is that a problem that you face, people coming in for this? Are Are you aware of it when somebody's buying something?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because we don't typically have a lot of stock on the date of a console launch, we're less concerned about scalpers buying our stuff because we don't have enough to make it worthwhile for a scalper to, camp out and try to, we're just too unpredictable. With Target, if you're good at being a scalper, you know when the truck is coming and everything. I guarantee you cannot predict our FedEx guy's schedule at an indie shop. So, but we have the opposite problem, which is that oftentimes scalpers will not wanting to do any work at all, so they know they'd be taking less money. They'll pick up stock and then they'll call the shops and be like, hey, I've got, and this happened a ton with the PS5 launch. They're like, I've got 6 PS5s. What are you paying? And I just tell them, well, we're going to sell them for MSRP. So
wow,
you're going to get a little less than MSRP. I'm happy to pay you pretty close to that because our customers definitely want PS5s. But, for us personally, it's never worth the extra 50, 100, whatever dollars to take that reputational hit for marking up anything at all. I mean, any brand new product, we don't mark it up, regardless of how popular it is. We'll put in purchase limits on things. And again, this is mostly applying to Pokemon cards right now rather than consoles. But, when we get a new Pokemon card drop, we're not marking up the price, but we are limiting you to 5 packs per customer. So, if you are someone who actually wants to open them, great, you're at least going to get a few. And if you're a scalper, okay, yeah, you can get 5, but is that really worth your time? You can probably camp out at Costco and have a better luck there. So
I'd love for you to make the case for why people should frequent their local indie video game shop. Whether it's for the Switch 2, they don't need to keep calling you right now. Maybe give it a few weeks. But also for any other gaming purchases. Why do indie game stores matter? I
do think, I don't want to get too crazy philosophical with this, but we live in a fairly isolated world now where it's very easy to never interact with a human ever again. I mean, if you want to, you can do your job, remote work from home. You can have all your food delivered. You can very easily just kind of slip, even accidentally, into a not seeing other humans. And I'm not saying you need to go out and be a social butterfly or anything, but something I really love about just physically shopping in physical stores, regardless of whether or not you're buying anything, maybe you're buying a keychain or a candy bar or something like that, nothing super crazy, is just simply being around other people that share interests and values with you it's good for you. Even if you don't think that it's something you're seeking out to do, it's good for you to be around other people with your interests and with your kind of sensibilities. And I see that all the time in the shop. I mean, I see people strike up conversations and friendships in the shop. Again, not saying you need to go there to meet people or anything, but just simply to the amount of times I've been talking to an employee or a customer or something about Expedition 33, and then someone else is like, oh, I'm playing that too, it's great, have you seen the part where blah, blah, blah? That kind of thing is it's really special, and it's something you can do in any specialty store for your interests. Good ones will have good vibes and be a nice place to go. And, obviously, I would love literal support in the terms of dollars, but I would rather just have a nice experience to give to people. I would rather make a space where people don't feel like, oh, if I go in here, I have to spend some money. I'm not saying leave your kids here as daycare, but
please don't.
By all means, come in just to browse with no intention of buying anything. That's fine.
Hey, listeners. I mentioned up top that Kelsey is, alongside a small business owner, a Nintendo historian. So I wanted to create a baton handoff from one Nintendo expert to another. And that's why I had to ask Kelsey to lay the foundation with the history of the original NES launch.
Sure, yeah. So if you look up the launch of the Nintendo Entertainment System, it'll tell you it came out in 1985. And that's true, but it's not really an accurate picture of what happened. Nintendo was trying to enter a market that had been pretty burned by video games in the past, at least in America, where they're trying to roll this out. I mean, the Famicom was already pretty successful in Japan at this point. It was released in 1983, so this is a couple years later. And they'd been kind of trying to figure out what the best way to bring this to America was. And they kind of knew that given the big, Atari crash and that retailers were stuck with all of this excess video game stock and everyone was kind of burned on it, that they couldn't just be like video game, because people would be, at the very least, the retailers, who are the people you actually need to sell to, not the consumers, would be like, no, thank you. The reason it's called the Nintendo Entertainment System is basically that. It's like they're trying to be like, no, it's not a video game. It's an entertainment system.
The original Xbox One, if you will.
Yeah, exactly. This is for your entertainment. This is your living room entertainment. And so they had a couple different like versions of that design-wise that were, meant to make it look a little bit more like a VCR, meant to make it look just more like a piece of furniture than a video game console. They were really only able to first get it into New York City. I mean, this was true for just many things before we lived in this extremely online and globalized economy and everything. But this wasn't something they could just put in a store in every single city at once. So they started with a rollout in New York City. They were able to basically convince FAO Schwarz that we will just give you the stock. You can pay us after it sells, after it, has not been returned. Please, please, please just try it. And it actually worked pretty well because the Nintendo was a very good product. So, it was a little bit of a harder sell. But once people started buying it, they were like, oh yeah, this is good. This is fun. And that just sort of, that eventually started to catch on and make it so that they were able to start expanding into other places. So that was 1985. Unless you were kind of a posh kid in New York City whose parents bought them the fanciest of new toys, you did not get an NES in 1985, and you had never heard of an NES in 1985. It really wasn't until 1986 and 1987 that it started really, becoming a worldwide, or a nationwide phenomenon, I should say, and people started picking up the systems, and that's when you get the launch of, Nintendo Fun Club News and later Nintendo Power, which really was able to kind of, build a whole culture among kids about how cool this system was.
I think it's like hard for people to imagine the era of the sharper image. Like, did you ever go to these?
Oh yeah.
They also started in New York, and then they would be like in every city. But you would go in and they'd be like, it's called a CD player. And you'd be like, whoa. But then it would be like right next to like just a glowing orb with electricity in it. And they're like, we're not sure which one's going to be it.
And like a massage chair.
Yeah, like one of these is definitely going to pop, but we're not quite sure which one. Where now it's like a new piece of technology comes out and it feels like in an instant if it is an iPhone or that weird juicer that was actually just crushing juice packets.
Love the juice era.
I love it. It was great. So, okay, I don't remember the NES launch. I was born in 1985, so naturally, I failed to be ready for this.
Even if you were a posh child in New York City, you probably still did not get one at 0 years old.
I love it. Where can people find you?
I am on Blue Sky, at kelslewin.bluesky.social. And then Pink Gorilla is just Pink Gorilla Games on everything, on Instagram, on Blue Sky, on Facebook, all of those things if you want to follow the store at all.
Perfect. And you just opened one in Vegas.
We just opened one in Vegas.
Oh my gosh. That's awesome. I'm definitely going to check it out next time I'm there.
Oh, sweet.
Whenever that is. I said that like I'm definitely going to be there soon, and I'll be honest, who knows when. It's a terrifying place.
That's the thing about Vegas is everyone goes there at some point in their life, whether they want to or not. It just happens.
It's very true. Cool. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Next up, we have Chris Kohler. For as long as I've known the word podcast, I have known the name Chris Kohler. These days, Chris serves as the editorial director at Digital Eclipse, where he and the team have blended video games, preservation, and documentary into these singular projects like Tetris Forever and Llamasoft, the Jeff Minter story. In the 2000s, Kohler was a pioneering online games journalist. In 2004, he published one of the earliest English-language books on Nintendo and the Japanese games industry. It's called Power Up: How Japanese Video Games Gave the World an Extra Life. He launched Game Life, Wired's dedicated games blog, in a time when these didn't really exist, all the way back in 2005. That's 20 years ago. And a year later, in 2006, he began appearing on Retronauts, one of the longest-running video game podcasts. I listened obsessively in my dorm room in college. If you had told me then that I would have a podcast of my own and I would be talking to Chris Kohler, I would have passed out. Probably because I was living off of basically ramen and boxes of mac and cheese, and I was not really nourished, but also because I would be really excited to chat with Chris. And I did. So let's get right to it. I spoke with Kelsey Lewin for this episode about the actual retail side of things. She also brought up the early history of the NES and the kind of weird rollout. What was the first big launch as we know it, launch event in the U.S. for Nintendo, I should say?
Right, so it wasn't, it's a very interesting question, because if you're asking, like, what was the first big launch as we know it, it's like, it wasn't the NES, because the NES, nobody thought, not even people in the U.S. didn't even understand that they wanted this. You know, it was test marketed. It took a year before it was even available nationally. Because by the end of, they launched it in the end of 85, and by the end of 86, then you get a press release from Nintendo that's like, hey, by the way, the NES we are now announcing that it is officially available nationwide, not just because they were going test market to test market to test market. But the funny thing about the Super Nintendo is that it was the first time that anybody had experienced what we now think of as a console transition, because one of the major reactions from parents to the launch of the Super NES was they thought that Nintendo was ripping people off. They told their kids, you can go watch like news packages on this from 91.
Our video game industry is hotter than ever this season, and one good reason, Nintendo has introduced some hot new toys. But have things gone a bit too far? This evening, Ken Shafe wraps up a special report on Video Mania.
The Japanese toy maker Nintendo has come out with a new set of electronic video games. At $200, a Super Nintendo setup costs twice as much as the old system, and you can't mix and match. For the money, the company promises better pictures, sound, and adventure. Some of the new games look like updated takes on fairly well-known formats. Some parents are refusing to be taken in.
I'm going to say no, and I'm going to explain to him how people marketing to make you spend more money.
Nintendo controls 80% of the video market, though some game players prefer the pictures of its competitor Sega. But no matter how you play the game, or which game you play, things definitely have come a long way since Pac-Man. Ken Shocknick, Channel 4 New.
And it's like, well, I told my kids that this is what these companies do. They rip you off because you have a perfectly good video game player at home. And then they tell you that that's not good enough anymore and you have to buy this new player. And that's how they get an extra $200 out of you. Now, first of all, we know that if Nintendo could just keep selling the NES forever, they would have done that. And in fact, they were almost forced, to bring out a 16-bit system at gunpoint because of competition from the PC Engine, Mega Drive, stuff like that. And then, of course, they're not making a dime off of selling you a Super Nintendo at $200. They're probably losing money on that proposition with the hopes that they'll say the games later. But parents thought it was a scam. They were really like, they looked at the NES like it was a VCR, and they're like, you have to have Super VCR. My friend's mom was just like, you have too much invested into the original Nintendo. I'm not buying you a new one because you have too much invested into your library of games. So obviously people got over this, but also there was no launch date for the Super Nintendo. It just sort of started rolling out, in the fall. Wasn't hard to get one. You know, you could just go buy one. We read Nintendo Power. We knew that it was coming out, but it wasn't like you have to go pre-order your system. So for Nintendo, getting in a roundabout way to the answer of this question, for Nintendo, the first big launch event was the Nintendo 64, because everybody understood that this console's winding down. It's been 5 years. We're going to buy a new console. Nobody was saying it was a scam. Everybody was extremely excited about Mario 64, the idea of these 3D games. I think we should also point out here that the purchasing power was kind of shifting, because if you had an NES when you were a kid, your parents bought that. If you had a Super NES when you were a kid, it's probably also your parents buying that. Like I was fully Nintendo generation, but like I was like 11 when the Super Nintendo came out. So Nintendo 64 comes out. Now you've got people that are 16, 17, 18, and I bought it for myself with money that I made from my first job.
Yeah.
And I went into Electronics Boutique and I pre-ordered the Nintendo 64 and I pre-ordered the games. And there was a launch date.
What do you remember from that day itself?
The system was supposed to launch on September 30. Another thing happened between the Super Nintendo and the Nintendo 64 launches. That thing is the internet. In 1993, I think we got America Online. 1995, America Online adds the World Wide Web. People start up Nintendo 64 fan pages. So now I'm going on the internet and reading the fan pages about the game and about the system. And there's anticipation, and there's what games are going to be at launch. Up to the minute, Chris. Up to the minute news updates. You know?
Oh, I remember IGN at this time.
Yes,
yeah,
IGN
N64.com. Yeah.
N64.com.
They were running ads for the Mr. Bean movie. That's how you know it was a long time ago.
And so every day you might get some new update on what's going on with N64. It's getting closer and closer to launch, and the anticipation is killing you. And so the thing was supposed to, September 30th was the launch date, but the video game industry did not actually adhere to those things. Because now everybody, all the retailers understand, you get the product in, it says this is the launch date, and the system doesn't even let them sell it, because it's all built into their point of sale systems. It's that if you try to ring it up, it says, whoa, you can't sell this until this day. That was not the case in 1986. And so the stores got their Nintendo 64s on the 28th or thereabouts. And I find out on the internet that people are like, oh, I got my Nintendo 64 and my Mario 64 and I'm playing it right now. And I remember calling my EB in the mall, and they were like, yeah, we have them. We're selling them. I'm like, Mom, I'm going to go to the mall. Because, 16, just 16, and on my driver's license. Yeah. So we get in the car, go to the mall, go to EB, have my pre-order, like little pieces of paper, pre-order slips in hand. They gave me an art print, like this 8.5 by 11 total weird garbage, print of the picture of the Nintendo 64 in a little envelope as my pre-order bonus. Thanks for pre-ordering through Electronics Boutique. I make the last minute decision to grab Pilot Wing 64 because, the other thing is there's no games available for this thing.
Yeah.
And wouldn't be for a long time.
Back to the Nintendo of it all. How did the Nintendo launch strategy change throughout the 90s and the early 2000s? At a certain point, launch moments become a thing, right? The midnight launch. They are a phenomenon, and I'm curious where Nintendo fits into that.
There was a lot more hype around the GameCube launch, especially because as Nintendo supporters, as Nintendo fans, everybody was really hopeful that Nintendo was going to get their groove back with the GameCube, because the thing that was holding back the Nintendo 64, the lack of a disc media, was going to get solved with GameCube. And so then the hope was that, the GameCube was going to do better on the market, have more software, which certainly did happen, but I don't even think it sold as well as the Nintendo 64. It had more and better games, but it had even less pickup. But at the beginning of the whole thing, there absolutely was like a GameCube shortage. And what I remember is that this was the era of certainly Electronics Boutique, maybe other game stores, taking advantage of this fact and forcing a bundle on you. People don't do this anymore, but I definitely going in and saying, you have the GameCube? And the woman behind the counter being like, you got to buy the GameCube, and you got to buy 3 games off of this list, and the list is all the games they can't sell, and you got to buy a third-party controller that doesn't work, and you have to buy a third-party memory card where they're making all their margins on, and it's like $378 or whatever, and that's how you could buy a GameCube from EB. And they stopped doing that because it was so nakedly scummy.
Yeah.
Legal? Maybe? I'm not sure. I think Wii is probably where you had that midnight launch, phenomenon. Not that Nintendo, I don't think Nintendo was like doing anything to sponsor any midnight launch activities. That feels like a very Xbox thing to do. You know what I mean? Xbox is, was really going hard after the gamers and really going harder after the older teens to guys, males 18 to 35, midnight launches and promo items, all of that stuff seems very like Xbox centric and sort of US centric. Whereas I think that there was probably a demand for the Wii to get it on that, at that moment.
Yeah.
But it wasn't, I don't think it was something that Nintendo at that time, and especially with that particular product and where they were aiming it at, was they probably weren't really encouraging that.
Do you think Nintendo needs a big launch moment in the same way that Xbox or PlayStation does?
I think that there needs to be, how do I put this? Nintendo kind of announced the Wii U, and people were confused as to what it was because a lot of people came out of that first announcement of the Wii U thinking that it was just a controller for the original Wii. And people thought that because Nintendo did not talk about the console itself, because Nintendo at that time was like, we shouldn't talk about the console. We shouldn't talk about, because we're losing in terms of tech specs and whatever. So let's not talk about that, and let's just talk about the games. There was this old quote from, Hiroshi Yamauchi, right? That's like, nobody wants to buy a console. The console is a nuisance, and they have to buy it if they want the games.
Yeah.
And that is logically true, and then also wrong. It's like, it is logically the case that no one really wants the console and they really want the game. That makes sense. But in fact, I think the lesson of the Wii U is you actually do have to get people emotionally excited about the idea of buying the machine itself. Even though that machine with no games is useless, people want to love this shiny new toy that they're bringing. So it has to look really cool. They have to know about what the machine does. They have to get excited about that in order to get them out there and to get them to buy that machine. Because to get them to put that money down, for something, which in the case of the Switch 2 is, it's significantly more money than Nintendo has ever asked, for anybody to purchase a Nintendo console. They must love the thing. And so I think Nintendo did, in fact, learn that lesson because, when they then went and showed off the Switch and now the Switch 2, they really are leading with, look at this cool new snazzy piece of hardware. People really do want to love that piece of hardware.
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing here then is when we think of a launch event, it is a means to creating this connection between the consumer and this new expensive thing that they're going to bring into their house and give like pretty prime real estate in their living room or their office or wherever. And maybe that's why it has changed over the years, like how you create that connection at one point is a midnight launch, but now it's maybe a different way of creating that emotional connection.
Yeah, that's what I was like circuitously gonna get around to eventually, which is yes, like this event, whether it's a launch event or whatever, this is the first step in the process of generating the buzz and the excitement and the hype around the new machine. When you launch something, you want there to be a whole lot of excitement around it on day one, which generates then more excitement as it becomes a spectacle. And once it's a spectacle, then other people that are not part of the spectacle go, oh, hey, look, a spectacle. I wonder what's going on. And then they find out about that. If you're going to put a product out there, there better be a lot of hype around that product on day one, or else you risk there not being any at all. If the Switch 1 is any indication, this could be, you could be buying, your last Nintendo. I don't know if it's going to be your last Nintendo console, but it's like this could be, day one of the next 8 years of your life, as far as this is the platform that you're going to be on. It is a momentous occasion because we're finally, the extent of the demand that's been built up for this is crazy at this point.
You know who the real winner is in the end?
The gamers. Your
friend's mom, who says you only need one of these. She's living the dream. Every 8 years, damn. This is perfect.
Yep, that's right.
And the gamers, they win too.
Oh, well, I mean, she was actually right. And, unfortunately, that does bring something up, because backward compatibility, I think, has been shown to be a really important part of getting a new console launched and getting it out there, communicating to folks hey, psychologically, as my friend's mom said, you are not giving up your investment that you've already made into the software and the ecosystem that you're already involved in, because this is going to subsume all of that. Oh, you got Switch 1 games in your backlog? You play them on Switch 2. They're going to be even better. Don't worry, because you're going to play them on this new hardware. And again, I feel like, I don't know who it was, maybe, Jim Ryan or something like that, as he was sort of exiting out of PlayStation. Maybe he said something about backward compatibility is the most requested and least used feature, But psychologically, knowing that it's there could be the thing that pushes you over the hump to buy the new system.
Before we wrap, this will be airing to Patreon subscribers on the launch day, and just a short while after that to everyone else. Do you feel that Nintendo has done its job in getting you emotionally invested?
I can't. I'm 45 years old, Chris.
Young. 45 years young. You
You can't there's nothing you can emotionally invest me into that much anymore. You know what I mean? It's no longer oh my God, I can't wait for it. I mean, when the box shows up, I'm probably gonna have forgotten that it was Switch 2 launch day, because I'm gonna be loading the dishwasher or something like that, and be oh, what's this? The older you get, faster things go. You know what I mean?
Oh, so I get it. I mean,
hurtling towards infinity at this point. I want to play the Mario Kart. I want to play the, everybody's talking about the open world Mario Kart. I have too many scars. I'm okay, so I'm going to be driving around an open world Mario Kart, just having a good time, and then out of nowhere, a blue shell is just going to come and just slam me in the face, right? That's what's going to happen. I don't know if I want to. Sure, but I'm looking at I want to play the Donkey Kong game. I think that might be the sleeper hit of the launch window.
You are the blue shell in the Donkey Kong game. You're just here to wreck shit whenever and wherever.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for making time to chat. Welcome to Act 3, the week in news. What a week it has been. So much has happened. So much more is set to happen. I am recording this section on Thursday, January 5th at, 12:48 p.m. Pacific. That matters because I have a Nintendo Switch, I saw the PlayStation State of Play stream, and I have yet to attend Summer Games Fest. First things first, Nintendo did it. They did it. 8 years after after the launch of the original Switch, that is including years of rumored delays, the Nintendo Switch 2 is now available, and I attended my first not quite midnight launch event. This is my first video game console launch as a Californian. Turns out, midnight launches on the East Coast become after-dinner launches on the West Coast. Thousands of people across the country lined up at GameStops and Best Buys to collect their new handhelds. I arrived around 8 p.m. at Best Buy, the one near me, only to discover two snaking lines across the shopping complex. One, I expected, for people hoping to grab a Nintendo Switch 2 from the general stock. They hadn't planned ahead, or they weren't able to secure a pre-order. I get it. But the other line I had not accounted for. It was just as long, and for people claiming their pre-orders. The mood was, like so much of the Switch 2, pretty blasé. Some folks brought their kids who seemed genuinely confused by the very idea of a Best Buy, let alone waiting outside of one after bedtime. A few people played their old Switches, some chatted with strangers, but most folks did what they always do, even when they're not waiting online. They put in their headphones, and they picked up their cell phones. I can't argue with that. It was late at night on a Wednesday. The consoles went on sale at 9 p.m. Pacific, and around 10, I had collected mine. Another 200 or so people were still waiting on the pre-order line behind me. I waved, they waved, and then I nearly tripped over a child who was flipping through a book of Pokemon cards. All in all, a success. What do I like about the new console and the games? Hey, thanks for asking. I will have to save that for next week because, honestly, I haven't had time to play it. But I will say, it is really encouraging to hear from experts like Digital Foundry about initial positive performance improvements on games that taxed the original Nintendo Switch. Games like Batman Arkham Knight and The Witcher 3, they seem to be running well. Still kind of look like muddy but like they run well, so that's something. I am doing my part. I downloaded Astral Chain immediately, and that game, it still rips. Next, Sony PlayStation kicked off the Summer Game Fest week with a fresh State of Play, their version of the Nintendo Direct, a streaming showcase of a bunch of new video game trailers and announcements. PlayStation stuffed a lot into the 55-minute runtime, featuring a variety of single-player games, reboots and remasters of beloved franchises, and some IP tie-ins that actually look pretty promising, probably because they're made by established developers. IO Interactive, the Hitman folks, they're making a James Bond game called 007 First Light, and Arc System Works, the folks responsible for many of the Guilty Gear and BlazBlue games, they showed a 4 versus 4 Marvel fighting game with an absolutely sick anime art direction. It's called Marvel Tokon Fighting Souls, which, sure, why not? The organizers of this State of Play, which is filling in for the defunct E3 Sony press event, seemed to know their target audience and the message they needed to send, offering a mea culpa to the core gaming fan base for years of focus on free-to-play living games and good, but, in my opinion, overly familiar PlayStation franchises. Related, as Taku noted, with GTA 6 shifted to 2026, game publishers are rushing to fill that fall release void. In September of this year, we will get Silent Hill F, Baby Steps, Final Fantasy Tactics, Borderlands 4, and many other games. That's before the Summer Game Fest announcements, along with the upcoming Xbox showcase. And I suspect Nintendo still has a few cards up its sleeve. And lastly, I would like to read a press release. I know, not something I like to do normally, but for this one, I'll make an exception. The following statement is from Yasumi Matsuno, the original script and scenario writer and editor of Final Fantasy Tactics. He writes, nearly 30 years ago, the collapse of Japan's bubble economy engulfed the nation's financial institutions in mountains of bad debt, triggering a wave of corporate bankruptcies, a sudden and extreme rise in unemployment rates, and stagnation of Japanese society as a whole. It was an era when many were robbed of hope, when dreams were measured by their price tag. Against this historical backdrop, I crafted a story. It was the story of Ramza, a young man who fought tirelessly against the entrenched social class system. It was the story of Delita, who sought to take advantage of this confusion and despair to advance his own social position. It was a story of a peculiar destiny in which friendship and betrayal intertwine. And now, in 2025, a time when inequality and division are still deeply rooted in our society, I offer this story once again. The will to resist is in your hands. Gotta agree with him there. Up next, we've got the end of the show. Unless you're a subscriber, in which case, you're lucky enough to hear from my parents. What a week. What a month. Thank you so much for listening to Post Games. If you enjoy the show, please consider any of the following: leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, sharing an episode with a friend, or, this one helps a ton, subscribe on Patreon. Post Games supporters get the show and the newsletter early on Fridays at 5 p.m. Eastern. They get extra acts and bonus materials, and each month they get a video in my ongoing series, Video Game Journalism 101, which is, yes, a series about all the behind-the-scenes stuff of video game journalism, but also just a great primer on media literacy in a time when we all should have it. The first episode is already live. It's wonderful. And one other thing Patreon subscribers get: no ads. Listen to the show on any platform that you want, ad-free. Subscribe to the Patreon at patreon.com/postgames. Subscribe to the newsletter for free at post.games. Post Games logo by James Barham. Theme by Mark Sparling. And a special thank you to this week's guests, Kelsey Lewin and Chris Kohler. I'm running up to LA this weekend for Summer Game Fest, and I plan to get you some cool stories there. Hopefully I'll be able to share them in the coming episodes. Until then, I hope you have a wonderful time, especially if you got one of those new Nintendo Switch 2s. I'll see y'all next week.